Howdy, my totally tubular sharkaholics, and we are back for the Shark Scale, Year 4. And today's movie's a bit interesting. It's up from the depths, so this is one of the oldest shark movies that I've looked at on this channel. But does that mean it's any good? Well, this will be interesting, that's for sure. Let's find out.
So Up from the Depths has a pretty simple standard shark movie plot. Essentially, it is about this Hawaiian tourist community just trying to have a poppin' resort, people catching some rays, some waves, and all around have a good time. They were all chilling when all of a sudden a giant prehistoric shark shows up and just starts wrecking havoc, really, so they have to hunt it down. The plot is about as basic and bare bones as it gets for a movie like this. It did come out shortly after Jaws and was really just trying to recreate its success, so it makes sense that it would really be quite derivative. Of course, there are some differences here, but it plays out exactly how you would expect. I'm not going to dunk on the plot too hard, considering how old the movie is, but just know that there's nothing special here. The movie tries to have a bunch of quirky characters throughout it to try to give some meaning and just character to its characters, and while they succeeded at making some of them memorable, I would overall say it is pretty bland and just generic. That's really the best way to describe the synopsis, which is really just generic. It doesn't do anything unexpected or surprising and plays out exactly how you would expect. There isn't all that much to comment on because it is so stock standard. Okay, with such a substandard plot, how are the shark attacks in this movie, and how are the sharks in general? The shark is actually pretty alright for the time. It does have a few kills in it, and while there are of course the most standard and really just boring kills you could have ever seen in a shark movie, you also have to remember that this did come out in the late 70s, so obviously the movie is going to be cut some slack. There's really nothing special here in terms of kills, nothing truly unique, and they're all pretty standard stuff, especially by today's standards, and are pretty tame. I will say that the first couple kills in the movie you don't even actually see anything, which is quite lame. However, the second half of the movie has you seeing the entire kill where the shark just pretty much ends that person's life, and it's what you would want. There isn't very many kills in this movie, but at least all of them have some meaning. There isn't exactly a lot of gore here either. There is some blood that shows up, but really not much to comment on with these kills because again, it is really the bare minimum. The standard, the average shark kill comes off as pretty generic. The shark did not look all that amazing for the time, and it actually looks pretty particularly bad these days. It looks beyond just fake. It looks very clearly fake, and the movie fails to really hide this. You can see it in full view in multiple scenes, and it just looks almost like cardboard. Like, it doesn't move around very convincingly at all. It just isn't convincing really even in the slightest, and even Jaws was way more convincing than this. Even when cutting this movie some slack, the shark really just did not do it for me. Alright, with such a standard plot, a subpar shark, how is the acting in this movie? The last thing. Could it really save this movie from being at the bottom of the barrel? Well, it's also pretty average or subpar as well. Nobody really stands out in particularly any aspect. It seems like everyone actually tries in this movie, which is always a plus. And there is a character present in this movie that seems like he really wanted to display some emotion. Whether or not he actually displayed that emotion is a very different story, though. Nobody was truly terrible. Nobody was absolutely awful. And it was clear that this was not their first time acting. However, on the flip side, they don't do anything that is memorable, different, or even above average. Nobody goes above and beyond, and everyone was really just kind of there. And by the end of it, I was pretty just like, I've seen better, I've seen worse, and I mean, I really can't say anything more than meh. It exists, they acted, yeah, and if anything, it keeps the movie consistently average, which is what I would say this movie is overall. The movie doesn't do anything terrible, it didn't do anything offensive, it didn't make me question what I'm doing with my life, but it didn't particularly entice me, it didn't excite me, it didn't make me wonder what was going to happen next, and it barely even entertained me at all. This movie really is like the definition of doing the bare minimum, and that's just all it did. It did the absolute bare minimum that was needed for a shark movie back when this came out to cash in on the popularity of Jaws and call it a day. And don't get me wrong, it could have been much worse. I'm certain of that, but it also could have been a lot better. They could have shown the kills all the way. They could have tried to hide the shark in many other more creative ways so you don't see how crappy it looks. They could have tried making the characters honestly just more eccentric and have more of a personality. Maybe making the characters more wild or somewhat frantic would have made it better, or more memorable at least. And most of the characters really just fell flat here with their strange little quirks. Overall, with just how generally average this movie is, I could say that it comes off as a bit boring, which is really never a good thing. And the movie is okay at best, and at its worst, it's just pretty mediocre. This movie, it isn't a train wreck, but I wouldn't really recommend it to anyone either. With some thinking, this movie, I will be generous and give it a 2 out of 5 on the shark scale with a rating of meh. That is me being pretty generous to it because of the time. I just don't have all that much to say about this movie because it just doesn't really do anything. Like, if you can think of any basic plot of a shark movie, or like any basic plot threads or characters or just anything to do with a beach movie, it's here. I mean, it doesn't do anything interesting, and this is just one of the most standard movies I've ever seen. It's very standard, it's very boring, it's very benign ultimately. And yeah, it just exists. And that's why this movie, it just exists. That's all I can say about it. It exists, I reviewed it, the end. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I was pretty indifferent towards this movie. Have a good one.